When an invisible enemy uses a few lines of code to attack a nuclear power plant and global financial markets, governments are forced to take a desperate step, releasing a dangerous hacker from prison to deal with the situation. It all began with a massive cyber attack in China. Unknown hackers infiltrated the control system of a nuclear power plant in Hong Kong. They disabled the cooling pumps, causing the reactor to overheat, which led to a disaster. People within 6 miles were evacuated. A man named Chen Dawei was on his way to work. He is the captain of a cybercrime unit. He was watching the news. Meanwhile, Nick Hathaway is serving his sentence in a US prison. He was sentenced to 15 years for a cybercrime, hacking into banking systems. He is a graduate of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he once studied alongside Chen Dawei. While he was peacefully listening to music and reading a book, officers came for him and searched him. They found a phone in his cell. Using just a single command line, he managed to transfer hundreds of dollars to the accounts of his fellow inmates. Meanwhile, at a meeting, Dawei and his colleagues discussed how the virus might have entered the system. As it turned out, a similar attack on reactors had occurred in the US, but the virus failed to penetrate due to a different security system. They didn't understand what the hackers wanted. Dawei contacted the FBI in the US to get more information about the virus. Although the Americans were wary, they accepted the request for cooperation. Dawei gained access to download the code, and while examining it at home, he noticed a familiar line of code that he would never mistake for anything else. Chen Dawei went to his sister, Chen Lian, a highly qualified computer network engineer. He explained the situation to her and asked her to join the joint Sino-American task force, not only because of their family ties, but also because of her professional expertise. She was the only one he could trust right now, so she agreed. Shortly after, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange was hacked. The hackers artificially inflated the price of soybean futures, causing the price of soybeans to skyrocket. They had opened large positions in advance, betting on a price increase. When the price skyrocketed, they sold the contracts at a high price. The hackers made about $74 million by manipulating the soybean market. The accident in China and the soybean price crash in the US were the result of the same virus. The FBI explained their version of how the virus infiltrated the system, but Dawei, who had already joined the team, was dissatisfied with their theories. He stepped aside to speak with Agent Carroll and criticized their report on the virus, calling it the work of interns, not professionals. Instead, Dawei proposed his own plan. Nick Hathaway, who was serving a 15-year sentence for hacking, could assist with the investigation. The FBI considered this, and later Carroll arrived with a folder of information on Nick. She was outraged by the idea of releasing a dangerous man who had hacked 4 banks. Dawei explained that when he read the code, he recognized his own lines. He was a co-author on the first part. That was 8 years ago in college, and his neighbor was Nick Hathaway. Nick was the lead author of the code, and Dawei called him a genius. Now, however, hackers had found Nick's code online and repurposed it for their own goals, but Dawei was certain that only the true architect of the code, that is, Nick, would be able to figure out how to track down the attackers. The warden called Nick for a talk and informed him about the attack on soybean futures. He promised to ease Nick's prison conditions if he agreed to help the FBI. Nick was outraged by such an unfavorable deal, saying that the FBI had no chance of figuring this out without him, so he laid out his terms, seeking full release from prison immediately after cooperating with the FBI. In the end, they had no choice but to agree. Dawei met Nick, and the old friends were happy to see each other. The group boarded the plane together. Dawei gave Nick full access to the computer, but Carroll argued with him about it, threatening that if he didn't follow the rules, she'd send him to China and Nick back to prison. Lian stood up for them. The team flew to the Chicago Mercantile Exchange office. During the inspection, Nick reasoned that to install the virus, someone had broken into the room and downloaded it directly from a USB drive. Nick was given access to the main computer and concluded that the hacker had implanted the malware via an autorun.env file, which automatically launched the virus as soon as any USB drive was connected to the computer. An employee noted that there was one man who also had access to this computer and had quit after a month on the job. Nick asked for a photo of him from his ID badge. Later, Dawei and Nick analyzed the hacker's strategy. To avoid detection, it would have made more sense to artificially raise the price gradually, stretching it out over several months. But the hacker raised it by 250% in a single day, deliberately seeking to draw attention to himself. Maybe he needed the money right away. Since the code isn't finished yet, Nick thinks the main attack is still to come. Suddenly, they were given a photo of an employee named Lozano. As it turned out, his real name is Alonzo Reese, and he served 2 years for carding. He's currently in Los Angeles, and the team needs to find him. Lean and Nick set out to find Reese along with Mark Jessup, whose job was to keep an eye on Nick using a tracker in his ankle bracelet. Meanwhile, Davai and Carol demanded a list of traders who had profited from the spike in soybean prices. The exchange representative didn't want to give them the traders' personal information, but Carol threatened to ruin his reputation for covering up for cyber criminals. Meanwhile, Nick and Leon found Alonzo Reese, though he was already dead. Nick examined the guy's laptop and found an invitation to a meeting in yesterday's emails. Leon noticed that he had used network routing and could transmit encrypted data while remaining anonymous, without a single IP address. Nick replied to the email and agreed to the meeting on Ray's behalf. Mark Jesup's phone was out of service, and Nick, pretending to fix the problem, made sure the location data from the ankle bracelet was updated only once a day. Leon knew Nick had pulled a fast one, and now the two of them, Nick and Leon, headed to meet the strangers at the restaurant mentioned in the email. They arrived and sat down at a table, and Leon asked why Nick had gone to prison. At first, Nick got into a fight with a guy at a bar and sent him to the hospital, for which he served a year and a half. It was hard to find work when he got out of prison, so Nick started skimming credit cards and robbing banks. But he noted that he never touched people's personal accounts. Nick talked about how much he had learned in prison, both physically and mentally. The girl encouraged him to stop thinking like a prisoner and put his skills to use. Meanwhile, Davai and Carol had finally received the information and were analyzing it. Carol noticed a pattern: 3 transactions from different accounts, all sold within minutes of closing, and their overseas bank accounts were all in one place, Hong Kong. Nick and Lan were waiting in the cafe for at least someone to come in, when suddenly Nick spotted a surveillance camera and went to the staff room, where he sat down at a computer. The camera had been hacked and was streaming their conversation in real time. Nick sent a message to the hacker they were pursuing. The hacker was using proxy servers in Ukraine to cover his tracks. Nick told him he was already on his way and cut off the camera. Nick and Lan wanted to leave the restaurant quickly, but several men blocked their way. Nick used his combat skills and, throwing furniture, held his own against 3 opponents in the fight, even though he was threatened with a knife. Nick and Lan ran outside and caught a taxi. Nick called Davai and told him that Reese had been killed, and that the email was just a decoy to see if the hacker was being tracked. It's impossible to trace the hacker through a proxy server, but in the meantime, Davai had found 3 traders on the exchange who were following the same pattern when trading large sums. Nick and Leanne had been growing closer the whole time, and eventually they gave in to their feelings. In the morning, they all flew to Hong Kong together and passed over the nuclear power plant where the hacker attack had occurred. They landed nearby and spoke with a team working at the scene. The virus targeted the programmable logic controllers that control the start and stop of the cooling pumps. A local employee was tracking the virus when the explosion occurred, but they were eventually evacuated, and he didn't have time to finish. Leon noted that even if the server crashed during the tracking, there should have been dump files left behind containing traces of the code, or even the hacker's IP address. The problem is that the main computers in the control center are still hot. In Hong Kong, Leanne and Nick, accompanied by Mark Jessup, arrived to Davai. He was with Hong Kong Police Inspector Alex Treng, who would assist with the investigation. They were tracking 3 traders. One had just been released from prison, the second was a specialist in stolen cars, and the third was a substance abuser. The FBI suspected they were middlemen, as they didn't look like genuine stock exchange traders. Based on their locations, Nick deduced that all 3 walked through Yau Ma Tei. The team arrived there, and as it turned out, another group of operatives in the area was tracking a Lebanese man who came to this location every morning to meet someone, though no one ever approached him directly. His name was Elias Kassar. The team spread out around the perimeter, and suddenly, Nick asked one of the team members for his Android phone. Nick downloaded an app that detects Bluetooth signal strength and suddenly found a Bluetooth transmitter with a short range. As it turned out, the 3 pseudo-traders weren't meeting with Kassar, but with the Bluetooth transmitter. When the traders walk by, their receivers pick up a text message. They read it and immediately delete everything. It would take about a month to hack something like that. Carol wanted to interrogate Kassar, but Nick was sure he wouldn't crack. Later, Leon and Nick spent time together. The girl asked what he would do when this operation was over, and he just joked that he would work as a TV repairman. Later, the surveillance team was watching Kassar, and he spotted them because of a light reflecting off the dishes. The team of FBI agents got tired and fell asleep, when suddenly the alert system went off. Right now, 3 dealers were withdrawing a large sum of money. Davai notified Nick and then saw his sister with him. The team gathered, called for backup, and set off in helicopters. On the way, Nick wanted to talk to Davai about his sister, but his friend wasn't blind and had already seen everything himself. Carol reported that there was no communication with the surveillance team. Davai, along with Nick, Mark, and Alex, accompanied by backup, ran through narrow streets that led them to a building with a trapdoor. The FBI backup went down there and exchanged fire with the criminals led by Kassar. Kassar took out one of the FBI backup agents, but they managed to return fire at a member of the enemy gang. While the shootout was going on, the backup tried to push through the tunnel, and of course, it was a trap. A loud explosion rang out. Suddenly, during the shootout, a bullet hit Alex in the shoulder. The group of criminals was moving quickly, so 3 team members, including Nick, ran after them, leaving the wounded man behind. The team didn't make it in time, and the criminals left the port by boarding a ship. One of the criminals did not survive. Later, all emergency services arrived at the scene. The criminals, carrying bags of cash, made it to the ship. Then the nuclear power plant workers called. They had stabilized the reactor, and although it was hot in there, it was now safe to enter. The 3 of them, Nick, Mark, and Davai, headed there. They were warned that the temperature was currently over 140 degrees, so they put on protective gear and went inside. Suddenly, Mark started feeling sick in those conditions. Nick grabbed an axe and tried to reach the hard drive with it. He took it out and placed it in a box. The 3 of them successfully left the danger zone. They sat down to analyze the data, and the dump files contained fragments of the virus, though with numerous gaps that would make it difficult to trace the IP address. Suddenly, Nick stepped away to talk to Carol. He explained that before he was arrested, he had meticulously deleted all the evidence, but somehow the FBI had found the data that was supposed to have disappeared. She explained about Black Widow, a national security program capable of restoring the originals. Carol called to gain access to Black Widow, but her request was denied, as they considered it too risky due to her collaboration with the Chinese. Carol explained that national security officials had previously granted her remote network access to Black Widow, and suddenly Nick had an idea of how to get what they needed. Carol brought her laptop, and Nick planned to hack into Black Widow, but it was better for Davai and Carol to leave the building for now, because if the intrusion into the system was detected, they could claim that the FBI didn't know about Nick's actions. While Carol, Mark, and Davai went outside, an unknown man was watching them. He attached a device to Davai's car. Meanwhile, Nick came up with a plan. He wrote to a national security agency representative, pretending to be his boss, feigning concern for Black Widow's security, following their conversations with the FBI, and insisted on changing the passwords, attaching a PDF file with password security guidelines. In reality, this PDF file was a keylogger. Now, Nick could see everything the employee typed on his keyboard. Nick logged into Black Widow and downloaded the necessary files for analysis. Nick joined the rest of the group and reported that he had succeeded, which impressed Carol. He showed the hacker's IP address. As it turned out, he was in Jakarta. Since the server is protected by Inter-Armor hosting, it's impossible to hack. The only way was to get visas and travel to Jakarta to physically track him down. While Dawai tried to secure visas for the team, Lian examined the transactions of the hacker they were searching for. He had paid a large sum 3 times to a company dealing in satellite imagery in Malaysia, but why he would do that is a mystery. Meanwhile, Dawai went to his superiors and reported that he was making progress in the investigation and now needed visas for the team, but his superiors informed him that the US had contacted them and knew that Nick had hacked into the national security system. Now, they want to send Nick back to prison. Dawai's superiors told him to hand Nick over and head to Jakarta himself. Dawai got angry. He immediately sent Nick a message telling him to flee as soon as possible. Lian read it. She woke Nick up. Suddenly, the FBI called Carol and demanded that Nick be brought to the US for imprisonment. Carol realized that Nick had escaped. Mark didn't notice this because of the geolocation settings on that Nick had previously changed on his phone. Lian took Nick to some trustworthy people. Dawai came to them and, defying orders from his superiors, advised his friend to flee. Dawai wouldn't betray his friend. He decided that his sister wouldn't go to Jakarta, just the 2 of them. Carol and Mark were following Nick's locator. It seemed Carol was skeptical of her superior's orders, knowing that Nick was doing everything he could to find the criminal hacker. Dawai and Nick were about to hit the road, but Nick couldn't help but talk to Lian. She was upset that she couldn't go with them. Nick explained to her that he was now a fugitive and it was dangerous, and that her brother only wanted the best for her. Just then, she waved to Dawai, who was sitting in the car, when suddenly something terrible happened. The car exploded. The device that an unknown person had planted earlier had been activated. Suddenly, Kassar's gang arrived from behind and started shooting at them. Mark and Carol pulled up and tried to stand up to the gang, but they were also killed. Shocked, Nick and Leon fled. They went down into the subway. For now, they managed to escape, and Leon paid an acquaintance who cut open and removed Nick's geolocation bracelet and arranged a flight for them. They boarded a private jet and flew first to Malaysia. The coordinates from the satellite images the hacker had purchased pointed there. There, they climbed down into a trapdoor and found pumps of the same model used in the reactor. Tin is mined in Malaysia, and there are processing plants nearby. Nick concluded that the hacker had attacked the reactor not for the reactor itself, but to shut down the pumps. He realized that the attack on the nuclear power plant was just a rehearsal, and the soybean futures were a way to raise money. The hacker's main goal was to shut down those pumps and flood the tin mines and villages along with the people. That way, tin prices would skyrocket and the hacker would win. Eventually, Nick and Liane headed to Jakarta. At a local market, Nick bought some tools. They rented a car with cash and found a hotel room. That night, they drove onto the roof of a parking garage and rammed a truck straight onto the roof of the neighboring Intramur building, where the hacker's server was located. In the chaos, Nick managed to sneak inside and went unnoticed. At the computer, he copied all the necessary files to a hard drive, and back at the hotel, he and Liane analyzed the data and discovered that the hacker was planning an attack on 5 tin mines by flooding the valleys of 5 rivers. Liane discovered that the hacker had deposited $73 million in a local bank, cash they had earned from soybean futures. Liane went to the bank, having first spilled coffee on some fake papers. She arrived posing as a woman who had a meeting scheduled there, explaining that her presentation had gotten wet, and she urgently needed to print a new copy. She gave the man at the front desk a flash drive, and he plugged it into the computer. Meanwhile, Nick remotely accessed the bank's accounts and found the hacker there. Nick stole the money and left him a message with a phone number. They waited for at least some kind of response, and in the meantime, Liane was flipping through photos of her brother. Suddenly, the phone rang. It was Kassar. Nick demanded that his boss call back in 15 minutes. The phone rang again. It was the lead hacker, Sadak. Nick said he wanted 20% of the tin profits, since the hacker had used part of his code. Sadak demanded to meet with Nick, but Nick was only willing to meet with him and Kassar, no one else. Nick made an experimental bulletproof vest out of magazines and duct tape and hid a screwdriver in his sleeve. The meeting place was set, and Liane watched everything from a distance. She noticed that 5 more people had come to meet the hacker. Nick refused to meet at that location, and scheduled a meeting for just the hacker and Kassar at the square in 2 hours. The square was crowded. An event was taking place. Nick walked behind Kassar, but before he could attack, Kassar spotted him. While Kassar was searching him, Nick managed to pull a screwdriver from his sleeve and take out Kassar. Sadak noticed him and said that 20% was too much. Nick didn't care about the money. He wanted revenge for his friends. Suddenly, the hacker's gang opened fire. Nick took out the gang members, but then Sadak tried to sneak up on him from behind with a knife. Nick parried the blow and took out the hacker. Nick was wounded, and Liane helped him walk. Together, they treated the wound. Later, at the airport, they withdrew 5,000 euros from the card, leaving 46 million euros in the account. Thus, they disappeared, starting a new life after avenging their team. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit a like button and subscribe to the Movie Fist channel so you don't miss out on interesting movie plots.